Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar in our series, Designing Successful State Energy Office Inflation IRA Rebate Programs. Almost said the whole word, but went with the acronym. My name is Erin Cosgrove. I'm Senior Manager of Policy and Programs at NEEP, or the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. Quick background, NEEP is a regional energy efficiency organization, or REO, and we work to drive market transformation regionally by fostering collaboration and innovation, developing tools, and disseminating knowledge. And I am very excited to be joining you all today to host the second webinar in our series, Investing in a Community-Based Efficiency Workforce with the IRA. Before we get started, I'll go over some housekeeping notes. First, we are recording this webinar and we will be making it available to all participants. Within a few business days, we'll also provide the slides to all the participants. If you would like to ask a question during the webinar, so the format of the webinar will first be our panelists I'll present. During this time, I ask that you brainstorm and think about questions, and if anything does pop up, please submit the question in the Q&A button via the button at the bottom of your screen, and we will definitely be sure to address it within the last half of the webinar. Also, if you see a question that you like, you can vote it upwards and we can try to focus in on those questions. And please feel free to use the chat to interact with other participants on the webinar. Next up, I'll go over our purpose and outcomes. So this is a weekly 4-part webinar series with the goal to support state energy offices and stakeholders in implementing the $8.8 billion in rebate funds from the Inflation Reduction Act. We're hoping to watch each week's webinar will highlight a different aspect of leveraging this funding, which is why we've brought together the 6 great organizations that are hosting this webinar to ensure you get the most out of these sessions and are able to learn all about these rebate programs and different ways to implement them. We hope that you'll come away with a series of recommendations to ease home energy rebate implementations, ensure public involvement, and also deliver the benefits. So with that, we have a link here at the bottom, and we'll be sure to put it in the chat so you can register for our webinars. And we'll go to the next slide. But this is a 4-part webinar series with the goal of really supporting state energy offices. As you can see, we had our first webinar focused on designing and elevating principles around equity last week, which is available for you to watch online. This webinar will be focusing on workforce funding and how you can do community-based force programs with the IRA. Next week, we will be focusing on crucial partnerships with regulators and how regulators can be a part of implementing these programs. And our final webinar will look at how to leverage IRA programs to offer whole home solutions. So how to braid programs together to really create successful building decarbonization implementation programs. And with that, I will now kick us off with our webinar, Leveraging the IRA Workforce. So we have 4 panelists. I'll pass it off to Skip in a moment here, but we'll kick off with Skip Wiltshire-Gordon, Manager of Government Affairs at Andel. And then I'm very excited to have Mary McPherson from DOE join us to talk a little bit about her perspective with these programs. And then we'll have Waltasia Monsanto, Manager of PSE&D Clean Energy Job Programs. And then finally round it out with Paul Douglas, President of the JPI Group. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, please put your Q&A or your questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to them as we go. And with that, I will pass it to Skip. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Erin. And hey, everyone, great to be with you this morning. I'm so excited to be on such a great panel at a really timely point as states are beginning to actively work through a lot of these plans on rebates and obviously on contractor training. And thanks to ACEEE, NEEP, and all the other organizations that are hosting this webinar series. I think it's an incredibly important resource and hopefully helpful to all the folks on the line, including states. So as Erin said, my name is Skip Wiltshire-Gordon. I'm Manager of Government Affairs at the Andel Policy Group. Go to the next slide. And for those of you not familiar with us, Andel is a DC-based policy strategy firm focused on federal and state clean energy and energy efficiency policy. And we have a really deep expertise on residential decarbonization and home performance. We represent a range of firms and nonprofits in this space, including the Building Performance Association, which is the trade association of home performance contractors who perform energy efficiency retrofits, as well as E for the Future, which is a nonprofit that promotes residential energy efficiency. And so if we go to the next slide, I want to kick off our webinar today by providing some level setting of where we are as an industry. And as we all know, energy efficiency jobs were hit very hard by the pandemic. They've bounced back partially. They're still not back to where they were pre-pandemic. And so still, despite that being hit hard, this information comes from E for the Future's 2023 Energy Efficiency Jobs in America report. It just came out last month. I really would encourage you all to scan that QR code. It's got really invaluable resources. The data all comes from the Department of Energy's U.S. Energy and Employment Report, the USER, which is really, really useful, has a wealth of information. And E4's report focuses specifically on the energy efficiency sector. So hopefully is a really great resource for those states who are on the line, and as far as thinking through state-specific data on what your workforces do look like in energy efficiency as we talk right now. But as you can see from this chart from the E4 jobs report, energy efficiency still is a massive industry. It employs 2.1 times as many workers in the US as the entire fossil fuel industry. That's across sectors that include obviously manufacturing, professional services, as well as construction, which is a lot of the jobs that we're going to be talking about today as far as energy efficiency and electrification retrofits. And it's a really important industry, not only as an economic driver, but it's also because these jobs can't be exported. So all of the work of folks going into homes, these are performed by local workers. They're jobs that can't be outsourced, and they provide really great benefits to the folks who live in homes, right? Energy savings, savings on utility bills, improvements to comfort, health, and wellness via decarbonization measures and other, taking out asbestos and other materials. And they also lower energy bills, which create more dollars to circulate in local economies. So it's a win-win-win on energy efficiency jobs. They're incredibly important. And if we can go to the next slide here, it's also really important to note the makeup of these jobs are really primarily via small businesses. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about energy efficiency and electrification jobs. You see here, 75% of all energy efficiency workers worked at firms with fewer than 20 employees. That's really important to think through, especially for states, thinking through how we kind of get at accessing support for these jobs and support for the contracting firms. These are firms that are operating with very tight margins a lot of the time. Obviously, there have been challenges with inflation, increased cost of labor and materials, which continue to kind of be challenging for these firms while still they face incredible challenges with increased demand, which is great, but also challenging, and as well as recruitment challenges. So according to the USER, more than 84% of energy efficiency establishments reported some level of difficulty in finding suitable employees last year. So this is a widespread challenge, and this is why it's so exciting to be talking about this infusion of capital from the Inflation Reduction Act, historic amounts, into workforce plans for each state. And let's go to the next slide. One other thing I want to also emphasize, which I know other speakers on our panel emphasize, is the challenges that our industry, the energy efficiency industry, faces regarding workforce diversity and equity. This will come as no surprise to folks who are familiar with industry, but as you see from the demographic data here, the workforce is overwhelmingly male and it's overwhelmingly white. So as we talk about the opportunities that are unfolding from TREC, the contractor training dollars in the IRA, this is a great opportunity to grow the workforce and also expand it to communities that have not been included as of now. So we can go to the next slide. So to provide some context around the overall genesis of these bills, I think many of the folks on the call are familiar with the Hope for Homes Act, which is the progenitor of what was passed in the IRA. Congress recognized the importance of having ramping up demand via rebates. It was really important to be coupled with contractor training. They heard us loud and clear when it came to the importance, a lot of the challenges that contractor companies have been facing regarding training of their workers. So they paired these together via Hope for Homes. You see that there, and as well as the corresponding legislation on electrification, the HERA rebates, which has now been renamed HERE. So all three of these programs are incredibly important. $9 billion total, and as you see here, now are open to state energy offices to begin applying for. I know that wasn't the case, and I know for the states on the line, you've been hearing lots from your constituents about these programs potentially being available, and I know that it's been a long journey, but it is really exciting to have these now programs money available for states to begin applying, and we're really excited in this webinar series to begin to talk about some of the ways those programs could look. So we go to the next slide. So as far as underlying statutory requirements around contractor training, that specific $200 million bucket. So DOE and Mary with DOE is going to talk in a second in more detail about this, but the underlying statute of HOPE, which was the training piece of Hope for Homes, had a ton of detail about the way contractor training could work, supporting on-the-job training. And obviously, as we all know, that got condensed way down via the budget reconciliation process, which allowed us to get this passed. So ultimately, there are three main goals that are contained in statute that DOE has been trying to address via the TREC program. It's reducing the cost of training contractor employees, providing testing and certification of contractors, and partnering with nonprofit organizations. So there's a lot more detail that Mary will get through. I wanted to share that information up front as far as the kind of lodestars, as far as what these programs are aiming to achieve based on background there. But I wanted to share that. We can go to the next slide. These allocations, I think the states on the line are going to already be familiar, but to give you all a flavor of at least the largest allocations, obviously it's $150 million that's been released, which when you spread it around 50 states and the territories doesn't go incredibly far. We are still very proud that the $200 million in contractor training is actually the only workforce development dollars appropriated as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're really happy to see the really great need recognized by Congress here. But as far as the rebate allocations, they're all available on DOE's site. These are the top 5 state allocations to give you all a feel for how much states are getting. No state will receive less than $1 million as part of the allocations. I think some territories might fall below that number, but it is definitely an infusion. It's certainly just a down payment. There's a lot more that we need to do and a lot more support that needs to happen, especially for some of these firms that are seeking to train up employees and grow their workforce. But it's a really exciting start, and it is really exciting that each state is going to have the opportunity and territory to set up programs, either whole cloth or layer onto existing programs to grow and expand the workforce. So we can go to the next slide. Some key points about the TREC grants here, and I know Mary's going to go into a lot more detail in just a second on state applications, but it's $150 million of the $200 million is now open to states. The deadline is extended to now January 31st, 2024, still coming right up. Funds are highly flexible. I think Mary will get into that a little more, but there's a lot of opportunities for states depending on if you have existing programs or setting something up whole cloth to really be flexible and figure out what needs your state workforce has, because every state workforce is unique. There's a 4-year performance period once states receive funds. So that's a notable period given the way programs could be set up. And the TREC applications are pretty extensive, including need to be thought out, right? Workforce needs assessments, which the Building Performance Association is a leader on, workforce development plans, performance metrics, community benefits plans, and more. And that's also where I'd encourage states, and I can drop in the chat in a second, to check out E for the Future's report, which has state-by-state fact sheets. So it shows when you're thinking about your existing workforce, trying to get a lay of the land for your applications, really useful to be able to leverage that data that comes from DOE on what the existing lay of the land is for energy efficiency jobs and electrification jobs in your state. So we can go to the next slide. Just want to flag a couple additional policy resources for those on the line interested. Andel's prepared a couple of these. One is on the residential capital stack, so getting more into issues not related to training, but the rebate programs more specifically, and how these how states and different programs can optimally stack legally rebate program dollars, so homes and HERA, with the 25C tax credit, with the weatherization assistance program, potentially the greenhouse gas reduction fund, and more. So that's the left-hand resource. And then on the right, we've also released with the Building Performance Association FAQ surrounding the 25C tax credit, which is available now. I know that a lot of the states on the line have been getting lots of questions from constituents asking, when can I get my rebate? And I definitely encourage those folks, I'm sure you already have, to refer them to 25C Obviously, it doesn't work for everyone. You need to have a sufficient tax liability, and you need to be able to cover the cost of upgrades up front. Those are downsides to tax credits, but certainly is an important tool in the toolbox when it comes to incentivizing efficiency and electrification. And 25C is available now. It's now been made annual, and it's an incredible resource. I'm sure we can get into that later on a later webinar. So with that, I can just go to the next slide and put my contact info up. Would be happy to be a resource. Just wanted to provide some of those resources to all of you, considering how these plans are going to work in each of your individual states, especially around workforce development, and looking forward to the discussion and hearing from all the other folks on the line. So with that, I can turn it over to Mary McPherson with the Department of Energy.
Thanks, Skip. Hi, folks. I'm Mary McPherson. I previously worked at ACEEE, where my last name was Shoemaker, so it's great to be at an ACEEE co-hosted event. Today, I'm going to share with you mostly about the Training for Residential Energy Contractors program, but I will also give a snapshot of a few other new energy efficiency workforce development programs underway. So Skip laid a foundation on the TREC program. I'm going to focus more on community benefit plans and certification requirements as part of TREC. Next slide. So these are the most important dates to be aware of that are also listed in the administrative and legal requirements document. The one I will flag right now is the state application deadline of January 31st, 2024. DOE published the ALRD in July of 2023. So states have been working on their applications for a couple of months now and will continue to through January. If any states decide not to pursue the formula funding under TREC, then we will reallocate their portion through the competitive announcement that is slated for spring of 2024. That will be up to $40 million in additional TREC funding available on a competitive basis to states. Next slide. A couple of weeks ago, DOE released this narrative document template that states are allowed to use as part of their project narrative submission to DOE. We're not requiring it, but we thought it might be a helpful tool to make sure states are capturing every component of the project narrative section. We have been working with states on a few webinars and office hours to support them in developing their applications. And we're going to continue to make ourselves available for technical assistance through January. So if folks have thoughts on how we can be a resource to you, to state energy offices, please let us know in the chat. We're always looking for your feedback. Next slide. So as Skip mentioned, one key component of the TREC program is training towards industry recognized certifications. So DOE is working with the Pacific Northwest National Lab, PNNL, to vet certifications that states and others submit through our Building Science Education Solutions Center. So we're encouraging states and other entities, not all, others beyond states are allowed to submit certifications and curriculum. We encourage you to submit them sooner rather than later, because if we find that any are not in compliance, then we're happy to work with folks to bring them into compliance. And submitting now will help us avoid a potential backlog in the spring as we're working to get these funds out to states as soon as possible. Next slide. So many of you have probably already heard that DOE is requiring community benefit plans across a number of our programs. And those community benefit plans are comprised of 4 different pillars. The first is supporting meaningful community and labor engagement. We really want to make sure that workers and employers alike have a seat at the table and that there are processes for incorporating their feedback into program design on an ongoing basis over the course of a grant period for TREC over the 4 years that Skip mentioned. 2, we want to see that projects are investing in America's workforce and really have strong, enduring partnership plans with employers and are giving workers the skills they want and the skills that employers are seeking. 3, prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We're excited to hear which disadvantaged communities states are interested in prioritizing, and we're giving states the flexibility to decide who that is. But the fourth component of the pillar is making sure that states and other grantees have a robust plan for tracking and measuring and evaluating the benefits that are going to those disadvantaged community members as part of our government-wide target to reach the Justice 40 initiative. Next slide. But I want to drill down a little bit more specifically on community benefit plans as part of TREC. So I think the biggest part of the applications for TREC that states will probably agree is taking the most time is conducting a workforce needs assessment and gap analysis to really figure out which occupations are states needing to train people for. Where are there not enough qualified workers in the residential energy efficiency and electrification industries? So I think that workforce assessment will really be the foundation for a good community benefit plan. And then the second step would be identifying who you want to train to fill those occupational gaps. States can choose specific communities or focus on the whole state as part of their community benefit plan, but we're not requiring states to reach every corner of your state. We know that would be a big ask. But the third component here on the slide that's important is making sure your community benefit plan is implemented within the program requirements. So we're going to be working with states to track progress towards community benefit plans to make sure we're all achieving the results that we want to achieve and that we're reaching the disadvantaged community members that I know we're also eager to bring into the energy efficiency workforce. Next slide. So I also want to give a snapshot of the other energy efficiency workforce development programs that SCEP is currently rolling out. I mentioned earlier that we still have up to $40 million under TREC that we plan to announce in spring of 2024. That will be a competitive program that states can choose to apply for or not as they are interested. The next program is the Energy Auditor Training Program, which will provide $40 million to state energy offices to train residential or commercial energy auditors. And we're hoping to publish that announcement in December of this year. And that will also be a competitive program. The Building Training and Assessment Centers, we already announced that funding earlier this year, and we closed those applications, and we're currently reviewing them and making final selections. We hope to make that announcement very soon, but those funds will go to institutions of higher education like community colleges and universities, so they can stand up programs that train workers and students how to do energy assessments in commercial and institutional buildings, with a focus on K-12 schools and small businesses. And the last program I'll highlight is the Career Skills Training Program. We currently have an open funding announcement for career skills training that will close in late November. So this funding will go to nonprofit partnerships between industry and labor groups to provide both classroom and on-the-job training around building energy efficiency. So we're really excited that across these programs, we'll be training folks to work in all types of buildings. Most of these funds, as you can see, go to state energy offices, but as you can see, 20 million of them will go to non-state energy office entities. And so we really hope the combination of this $260 million will advance both public and private sector workforce development programs in energy efficiency and electrification. Next slide. So many of you are likely with energy offices, but many of you might not be eligible to apply directly to DOE for these funds. And so I wanted to end with a few actionable recommendations as to how you can engage on these programs. Starting from the top, state energy offices, I think it's really important that you start now to understand what your workforce needs are and what your training needs are, what existing training programs exist, and how you want to fill any gaps with these new federal funds. We invite you to apply to DOE's TREC and Energy Auditor programs and really collaborate across agencies. One thing we have been working with energy offices to do is encourage partnerships with state workforce and labor agencies who have a bunch of federal Department of Labor funding in particular that I think will be key for providing all the necessary services to your trainees, particularly those from disadvantaged communities. Next, labor and industry are key for sharing workforce and industry needs with state energy offices and monitoring opportunities to be partners to energy offices or even applying separately to the career skills training program. Local governments and utilities, many of them run their own energy efficiency programs, and I think have a sense of what the workforce gaps might be in delivering those efficiency programs. The same goes for the implementers working with local governments and utilities. So I hope you all will share what you see as those gaps and those opportunities with energy offices to inform their applications for DOE funding. And lastly, institutions of higher education, I think, could be great partners for conducting workforce needs assessments or even evaluating programs once states start rolling them out in 2024 and beyond. Next slide. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your questions later during this webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Waltazia Mansano, manager of the PSE&G Clean Energy Jobs Program, and I'm going to give you an overview of the various programs we offer at PSE&G that will highlight some of the areas that I think Skip and Mary were talking about earlier. So a real-life practical application of where there's opportunity and how you could apply some of this funding. So thanks, Mary, for that overview. And before I begin, I'd like to thank IEEE, NEAT, and the many other organizations who played a role in this webinar series. Next slide. So before I get into some of the data, I'd like to give some background on how our Clean Energy Jobs Program came to be by taking a step back and saying in September of 2020, Public Service Electric and Gas received approval from our New Jersey Board of Utilities for $1 billion to commit towards energy efficiency investments. That $1 billion was to be spent over a 3-year period, and it also marked us, which at PSE&G, we're the state's largest utility, which was a huge commitment, the largest ever actually in New Jersey, to focus on environmental benefits that include reducing customer costs and creating jobs and boosting the state economy. Our governor, Phil Murphy, talks about a clean energy vision and propelling New Jersey's economic and environmental sustainability policies to a next level. And we believe that our suite of programs does just that. So next slide. I work in renewables and energy solutions. That's what RES stands for on this slide. And this slide gives an overview of how we are taking a full multi-tiered approach for every aspect of our consumers' homes to address how we want to move forward with energy efficiency, electrification, decarbonization, and so many other aspects that we are focusing on for our clean energy future. At PSE&G, we're offering a combination of residential, commercial, and industrial programs. And as you'll see here, when we talk about everything from solar alone to electric vehicle, energy storage, we're still awaiting moving forward on that. But our primary focus to make sure that we're making our customer base eligible for free or affordable energy audits, energy efficiency kits, with a real focus on low, middle income, and small business customers. Based on this suite of programs that we are rolling out, we're expecting to deliver $1 billion in net customer savings, and approximately 70% of the programs will be earmarked to help business customers lower their consumption as well as their bills, which we think really makes us competitive at the nationwide level from an economic standpoint. Of course, what is an underscore of all of these programs is how we want to move forward with reducing our carbon emissions, which is also a goal of ours. And based on these investments, where we have been targeting avoiding 8 million metric tons of carbon emissions through 2050. There's also electric and gas savings that we have projected over a 5-year period, which we think will put us in the top 5 states for both electric and gas savings. And we've been very successful with these endeavors. You'll note that we've had more than 20 awards since 2021 that run the full gamut of the programs that we're offering to date, from everything from our marketing to our electric vehicle programs, as well as our clean energy jobs program. Next slide. So our Clean Energy Jobs program is a direct link to our energy efficiency programs that we're running. And we have expanded over the last 2 years to say that we're not only looking at our energy efficiency programs, but we are also supporting, by way of our jobs program, our electric vehicle programs, our solar for all programs. So we want to make sure, as we move forward with implementing a clean energy future in New Jersey, we are really investing in the local communities and ensuring that the communities we serve are represented in the work that we're doing. So we started with a pretty aggressive target of saying we wanted to create at least 2,000 economic opportunities with a focus on low and middle income communities and hiring directly from our customer base in order to make our program successful. Based on the $1 billion filing that I mentioned earlier, we know the projection said we would have at least 3,200 direct jobs and 1,100 indirect jobs as a result of the filing. So we decided to take a 3-prong approach to our Clean Energy Jobs program by focusing on jobs recruiting and looking at local organizations who specifically have core competencies around recruiting in the New Jersey area. And so I'm happy to say to date, we've had more than 2,400 economic opportunities created, thanks to the work that we've done with the partnerships that we've been able to establish. And we've also worked on the necessary partnerships to give those individuals the support they need from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, which might be financial literacy, resume writing, and transportation and childcare have really become an area of focus for us based on the mass exodus of women in particular during COVID, and how we can make sure, like Skip mentioned earlier, there's huge diversity gaps within this industry. So we've had a specific focus on how do we move forward with ensuring we put the necessary tools and funding in place for people to enjoy long-term success and retainment in clean energy. So the number 40 on the slide that you'll see in terms of our partnerships enable us to address those wraparound support services that we think are key in making us successful for long-term employment while focusing on local communities. We've also focused on our training efforts. We do a lot of work to make sure that everyone is Building Performance Institute, BPI, is the entity that does certified training in this space. So we offer a suite of courses that our candidates can take if they want to have gainful employment. We actually push those out to the trade allies. So those smaller companies that Skip mentioned earlier could really use some help with getting the necessary funding in order to train their individuals. So PSE&G is sponsoring that training for our respective trade allies, and their incoming employees as well as current employees can take that training. We want their current employees to take the training because it provides them with some base level skills to be promoted, thereby freeing up entry-level roles for other people to take those entry-level positions. So we have put a structure in place for a pipeline that we've seen a lot of success with. And with that, we've noticed there is a significant gap in the skills that are out there today and the skills required as part of the clean energy future. So with that, we've created a comprehensive program that we call our our on-the-job training program that allows individuals to have a mentor and some real hands-on day-by-day training so they can get a feel for roles in weatherization, such other positions like energy auditors and customer service roles that are required to market the suite of programs that we have at PSE&G. And we've seen some pretty successful stories along that area with individuals gaining meaningful employment after taking our on-the-job training program, as well as the suite of BPI certification courses that we offer. And so to date, we've trained more than 500 individuals to take those courses. Our focus on diversity, it manifests itself by way of vendors sending us their hiring information on the aggregate. We want to know how many women, veterans, those with disabilities have been hired on a monthly basis. And we track that data to ensure that we are hiring a diverse subset. And with that in mind, we've been able to win 3 national awards in the last 2 years, which we're very proud of. But we also run small business training with our African American and Hispanic Chambers of Commerce. And so those cohorts are very meaningful to helping individuals get their MWVBE certifications. For those of you who might be unaware of that acronym, it's the Minority, Women, Veteran Business Enterprise certification that allows small businesses to do additional business in the state, thereby growing their businesses and also helping utilities and others like PSE&G to continue the work we're doing to ensure we're providing economic opportunities throughout the state for small businesses. So our program is highly collaborative. It requires an enormous amount of high touch points in order for us to reach out to the community and ensure we're identifying organizations that could do this work and partner with us. And with that, we're also very focused at the state level to ensure we're coordinating in a way that makes sense with our state officials and impacting policy in ways that can continue to grow our energy future. So you'll see the quote at the top of this slide that does talk about an event that we held that Governor Phil Murphy talked about, just that, the level of partnership and engagement that we're doing. And we're continuing these efforts, and we're actually in the process of putting documentation together for our next filing. And we think we're going to have some additional success stories to share to that end. So that's an overview of our program. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over with this to Paul Douglas, president of the JPI Group. Thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Watazi. I appreciate it. Well, good afternoon. I guess it's good afternoon for some, morning for others. Paul Douglas, I am the president of the JPI Group. You can go to the next slide, please. It's an interesting conversation so far because as we talk about the workforce gap, the workforce needs across the entire country, our organization has been in the workforce development space for almost 20 years. I've been in the space for 20 years. We've been in the space for 9 years as a company. And I always say this before I get started, I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to create jobs, but I think most importantly, to change the lives of so many people across the country. So background on JPI, again, we are a minority-owned company. We employ folks in 38 states across the country. We support states, utilities, implementers of small business in executing these workforce development struggles that they have. So the goal for me today is to share with you guys how we do it, to give you a framework on how to go back to the DOE and respond to those RFPs and how you need to make sure that you're vetting out your potential implementer partners to make sure they have the resources in place to help you execute those projects long-term. You go to the next slide, please. These are just, again, some of our clients. And the reason that I show this is because we work with every layer of the industry, and that's mission critical because we get a unique lens of what the pain points are, what the needs are, and what some of the nuances are in executing these programs. So anything from the DOE to the states, to the implementers, to the African American Chamber of Commerce, we have a pretty holistic perspective of what needs to happen, but we also know where these programs can fail and where they struggle. And again, that's the goal for today, is for me to share that information with your team. Next slide, please. So I always start off workforce development with this conversation, because I think this is, it's not missing. I don't think we do it justice. When we look at job creation, I think we forget that there's 3 major bills that's passed over the past couple of years that's slated to create 2.5. I think it's a very low number. Everyone has their own number they get, but 2.5 is a minimum by 2030. But I think we forget one main point, is that as of today, there's a 5.1 million gap in the workforce that's needed to support the United States. So again, 5.1 million people that's needed, that's not available today to support the workforce. That's overall. In the energy sector, the percentage is a lot higher. So this is a really critical point that we need to start, because I think sometimes we have a lot of workforce development conversations, And we forget that we're way behind the 8 ball. So what we've done in the past is not going to help us to execute in the future. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some of the steps we take and some things I recommend for the states, local agencies, and partners across the country. I think number one, a lot of our approaches are very state driven. And again, when we come into any state, when we talk about workforce, contractor training, you have to fully understand what is the workforce analytics in my state. I think someone mentioned earlier, Skip said workforce assessment is needed. That's where we spend most of our time now. That's where most of the ask is. So this is an example of what we'll provide to a state. I try to take out the state name, but it's not too many states that have 20 million people. So you guys can probably guess what state this is. But this is a good example of a state that says, hey, within this state, even though there's 20 million people, there's only 10 million, right? That's employable. And within that, we have 6.1 that's going to retire soon. Like, there's a lot of nuances when we look at these numbers. If we don't consider those things, what can we do to make sure that we can help to support that in the future? What's the diversity in the state? Like, we do work in a lot of states. States are diverse depending on what region of America you're located. So we have to keep that in mind with some of the goals we put in place. And even with the millennials, right? How many millennials that impacts marketing? So again, this is baseline data that we have to start with when we talk about workforce development within the IRA. Next slide, please. So we looked at the national level. We looked at the state level. This is something else. We now start to look at one specific job, right? And I think Watazia mentioned, I think Skip also mentioned, energy auditors to me they're a key piece to long-term success for any energy efficiency program. So we're now starting to look at what's the data for energy efficiency auditors in that particular state. How much do they make? What's the competition landscape? Who's hiring these individuals? What's the gender, the race, who's retiring soon? And I can continue to drill down this data. This information is mission critical as we're responding to some of the RFPs. We're doing these workforce assessments. We have to know the information before we overcommit to some of the goals. And not so much overcommit, we at least need to know what the project plan needs to be to see long-term success. So again, we got to the energy auditor section. There's data here that we can drill down significantly more, because if we don't have energy auditors, we can't get into homes, right? So that's something I want to make sure we keep top of mind. And this is another data point that's important for us. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here. So this is when I present to SEOs across the country or state officials, I try to provide them a framework for what workforce development needs to look like. Workforce development's been around for a long time, since the 1930s. So this isn't a new concept. What I've learned over the past couple of years, is that many companies, many of the stakeholders, we all have great intentions. We just have a lot of stakeholders, right? We have nonprofits, we have academia, we have labor unions, we have CBOs, nonprofits, employers, and you have employers at different levels, right? You have government and municipal departments, universities, you have philanthropic organizations, philanthropy. So you have all these organizations with so many great intentions. But what I've realized is if we're not careful, it can be tough to mobilize this large stakeholder group to see the success that we need to see. So if you look to the right, and I don't want you guys to read all of this, I'm going to go through the highlights that I think is important for us to know. Whenever we go to a state, I mean, we have to really look at the DOL, the academia, the economic development organizations. We have to align with them, because I think what's happening is we're starting to have somewhat of a tunnel vision with these programs. And we have to remember, when we say energy, it's not just energy efficiency, it's wind, it's solar, it's battery storage. And there's still the utilities that have to get their job done. So workforce development programs have to be looked at with a turnkey, holistic approach. And we have to be very careful not to be so dialed into just only training people just for my job, because the reality is there's a chance that that training could be utilized in other industries as well. One of the key things that we do with all of our programs is a gap analysis. And the reason we do this gap analysis, we've realized over the last couple of years, is this is where we fail. We have to understand what are the skill sets that are needed to support this specific program. We have to understand what's the training. And I'll tell you guys one thing we've learned over the past couple of years is it's not always technical training. In fact, we're realizing more and more that the soft skills training is where small business, that's where they're asking for, right? it's communication, it's customer service, it's how to de-escalate arguments. Like those are the things that people really want to train their staff on. So the training analysis, we realize in the certifications, the technical training, there's still some gaps there, but the soft skills training is just as important. The wraparound services, as Waltazia mentioned, we know childcare and daycare, childcare and transportation are two big issues. We're realizing more and more that the rural issues are much different than the urban issues, right? So we have to be careful not to just slap one approach onto these solutions. Another one is just a state resource gap analysis. And what does that mean? The states have a lot of resources, right? If you go to the website, there's career pathways, there's apprenticeship programs, there's sometimes 20, 30, 40 resources available. And then we go create another one. So these are things that I highly recommend that we do for any workforce program. Because once we have this analysis, it makes the program much more effective and also much more iterative moving forward. Some of the bottlenecks that, again, that we see that we don't always talk about on the front end, capacity building. I think that we've seen this again, that if we provide all the small biz, let's say we provide them with all the workers they need, they may still struggle. There's HR issues, there's compliance, there's payroll, there's funding. Like these companies have to learn how to run their business. So we're starting to provide more technical training, technical assistance to ensure they can see success. The CBOs and nonprofits also need that same level of support long-term. We're seeing that there's some, the technology is a big one. So again, you guys see here, Correctity. Correctity is a platform that we use to pull a lot of this data together. But there's a lot of manual Excel sheets and emails going back and forth, and that's going to become very difficult to scale big picture. So again, we look at the gap analysis, we look at the bottlenecks, and then we provide a program that we can scale up and scale down. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. We at least have a benchmark to start. Next slide, please. Ultimately, I always share this example because when I joined the energy sector years ago, I realized that it can get very, very technical. I come back to say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to impact people's lives. We had a young lady that was in a program we talked to a couple years ago, and we started paying her roughly 16, 17 an hour. And she came back to our team and says, hey, I really want to make closer to 21, 22. And it was a push. And we were like, hey, that's great, but it's only this bandwidth. And she told us the why. The why was she wanted to move. And she wanted to move because she wanted to get her kids into a better school district, right? And because the program allowed for that, which most companies will never increase pay rate to $3, we were able to do that for that individual. She moved, she put her kids in a different school district. Now that's a generational impact. So I want us to look at workforce development, not as tactical as we normally do. We have the opportunity to change lives. Again, this is an example of, if you look at some of the poorest counties in New Jersey, we did a project with the Clean Energy Jobs Program where we actually recruited from some of the poorest, highest poverty zones in New Jersey. And we looked at the unemployment rates. We looked at the energy burden. We also were starting to look more at what the SNAP participation is. And if we can start to impact this community, that's what's really going to leave a lasting impact. So again, I'm excited. I want to thank Neeb, thank this esteemed panelists, all the other panels for providing their insight. And we are excited to help out this industry. You can go to the next slide. I think I'll try to keep this. I want to make sure we get to the Q&A. The reporting is another massive issue. What we've done also to kind of help states and help some of the local agencies, we've started to bucket the reporting. So whether it's IRA, Contractor Training Grants, Workforce Development, Justice 40, there's a lot of overlap with these data that we're collecting. So we bucketed a lot of this information, and we're trying to find more streamlined ways to collect the data. So we're not reaching out 3, 4, 5 times to the same stakeholder for the same data. So something else that we put in place that I'm more than happy to connect and discuss. Next slide. And again, I've talked about some of these things. These are just some of the programs we support nationwide. Next slide, please. Go ahead, my contact info. I think it's on the next one. If not, I can make sure that we send it out to you guys, but I appreciate the time again, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much to all of our presenters, and I'll welcome everyone to come back off screen. Paul and Watazia, your on the ground stories just kind of reminded me about why we're all here, and made me excited about working on workforce again. We got quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through them, and then I might pepper some of my own in, or just have all the panelists respond to some of them at once. So first, is a question we got on the workforce. So workforce for rehab and upgrade is completely different than for new construction. This is specific to Mary, but I also, if other panelists would like to talk about the differences you've seen in that workforce, that to follow on after Mary. But this specific questioner asked if this is, if they use federally funded home repair project. Yeah, I think Mary, you read the question and understood it. If you want to
Sure.
explain it, because there's
Yeah.
some other grants involved. But after that, we'll go to the wider group about the difference in new construction versus rehab building.
Thanks, Erin. So one key point that I forgot to mention for TREC is that a primary goal of TREC is to make sure there is a skilled and ready workforce to deliver the IRA home energy rebate programs, the efficiency and electrification rebates. The whole home efficiency rebates authorized through IRA 50121 focuses exclusively on existing homes, and the electrification rebates through 50122 focus on existing homes and new construction. So a big portion of the TREC training will be around doing upgrades in existing homes. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, and then Paul, Waltagia, or Skip, kind of your experience in like training a workforce that's doing upgrade in existing homes versus new construction, and any nuances when you think about upskilling that workforce or creating that workforce.
The only thing that I'll add to that, kind of back to the numbers where I started, we have to be careful not to separate these jobs so much. There's not a major overlap between those two skill sets. So I think the most important thing is to understand, like, hey, what certification is needed for both, right? So if there's a difference in certification, we'll make sure we address those. But other than that, some of the fundamental skills are very, very similar. And in fact, we're looking for ways to cross-train individuals more, right? So once one project finishes, they can actually transfer to the next. So my recommendation for that individual would be to identify the technical skills, the certifications, the soft skills, like what's needed for that job, what's needed for the other opportunity, and potentially is there any overlap where we can actually leverage individuals from both programs.
I'd also add a common offering for all of these jobs in clean energy is the need for some type of safety training, whether that be OSHA 10, OSHA 30. Can't express enough before you start to do any of this work, the need for you to take some safety training.
Great. I'll move on to the next question we got, which is still very related. So they asked, is there a way to support soft skills specifically with the TREC funding? So Mary, I'll toss it to you first to answer that.
Yes. Yeah. States can support soft skill development with the TREC training. I am working on a more formal written answer to that question right now that kind of points folks to the right sections of the federal regulations so you can determine exactly which costs are allowable. But we recognize that a person's success on the job really also depends on whether they've been given the right skills inside and outside of the classroom. So it's not just about technical skill development, but about soft skills, communication, timeliness, career growth. So yeah, I'm glad to hear folks are thinking about holistic training, including soft and hard skill development.
I'd like to Mary also to consider for that. I think sometimes we do a lot of the training before people start. And we have to be more conscious, and back to what Waltagia did with PSA, that has to be on the job training. I think that's where people really learn the most. And even with soft skills training, I prefer to get the feedback in the moment, right? Not so much a class on customer service. I think one way to look at soft skills is not just pre-employment, it's also for your incumbent employees, but also for your employees once they're employed for a certain time period as well.
Great points.
With that in mind around soft skills, as we acknowledge, all of us acknowledge the gap that exists by way of technical skills, right? What you'll find if someone were to ask, what's the aha moment for me? It was learning for all of these energy efficiency vendors, what they consider entry level can vary vastly from one company to the next. Some individuals consider entry level 3 to 5 years of experience, right? Whereas many people, would say, I thought I could come in day one and you'd give me the skills. So we had to normalize the requirements from the 30 plus vendors we work with to do this work on the residential and commercial and industrial sides of the house and say, if for the entry-level jobs, at least, if individuals could be identified who have a desire to learn, they're willing to think differently about how they do business today, they can carry themselves with a level of professionalism. What are those baseline skills that people consider soft skills that would be transferable? And if we could identify people with those skills, we could teach you anything, right? So we had to take a step back and start there for some of the entry-level jobs in order to fill our skills gap.
Just to tag on there, totally agree with everything everyone said about this. And, the fact that in some cases, these jobs are people's first jobs, as Waltagia said, entry level, this could be somebody's very first job. And so there's a lot of skill that needs to come there. I also want to emphasize, in addition to growing the workforce by bringing new folks in, which is incredibly important, TREC also allows upskilling. And I think upskilling is important for two reasons. One, to obviously increase the skill set needed to get folks up to that, potentially energy auditor level of skill set, but also important for the folks who are interested in the career, weighing it between this career and other careers to see that there's a pathway where you can grow, you can expand, you can be invested in, work your way up. And I think that's a really important point to make as far as making these jobs be as attractive as we believe that they should be.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hop to the next question, which will go to Waltagia first, but I'll ask maybe Paul and Skip if you have any other example programs you want to highlight, an opportunity to highlight those. But one question asks, how much money did PSD&G initially invest in the clean energy job programs in order to reach these results? And if you could also identify other groups you worked with, because I know you guys also leveraged other resources.
Sure.
That would be great.
Sure. So I hate to give the consultant answer for that, but it varies. So in terms of our scope, we knew we wanted to create economic opportunities for 2,000 individuals. And so that has led to our salaries that we pay during the training program that could vary from anywhere from like $19 to $23, $24 an hour for some of these individuals. We pay them while they're in the training program to the course cost of the courses themselves, which could be, $1,000 to $2,000 per cost. So it really does vary based on the scope as well as the partnerships. So you'd be surprised, there are grants that are available through the New Jersey Department of Labor. We've been able to partner with certain non-government organizations to use that funding, right? And so that's been quite helpful. In terms of companies that we've leveraged for partnerships, I mentioned earlier the African American Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We've done work with the JPI group. We also leverage a lot of like local churches, right? We have Nantech World and Jingoli Group as part of our steering committee. I encourage all of you to reach out to the Urban Leagues. That's a national non-government organization that would have local offices in your areas. And we work with many of the urban leagues in the state of New Jersey.
Awesome. I think we didn't get a chance to touch on this, but I think Waltagia kind of alluded to it. There's so much funding that comes from not just the DOE, right? We keep hearing the term BRAID funding. There's a lot of opportunity there from nonprofits and CBOs and utilities in the DOL, where there's money there to train these individuals. The conversation we're starting to have more and more is companies looking at workforce development as a cost or is taking up a lot of time. When you look at the amount of money you lose by not getting the job done, right? Or the amount of money you lose by posting and waiting, we're trying to change the narrative around like, this is something that's going to help your bottom line, right? So we know there's DEI benefits. We know there's supply diversity benefits. We know those things exist, but if you're just right about your P&L, absolutely, this is the best decision for your business because you look at, there's a gap, there's no one out there. So either you wait or you participate in these programs. So that's what we've seen. And there's, I think the program that Waltagia and her team helped to create, it's cascaded a lot of programs across the country. We're starting to see what they call MDI programs, Market Development Initiative programs. So more and more utilities are taking that same philosophy of how do we pull in more contractors? How do we develop more new employees? And how do we do so where it's fully aligned with the goals of that energy efficiency program? So I think in the past, it's been pretty much on the side, the program's over there. Now it's like, hey, we want to make sure that this program aligns fully to ensuring that we hit those KW8 goals.
Great, thank you. And so I'm going to have us run probably 1 minute over and ask all the panelists one more question that's in the chat that I'm just curious to hear. So just to give the audience. So thank you for holding 1 minute. But so one audience member asked, really, if you had a limited pot of funds to support work first, how do you prioritize what first? We have no end of ideas, and everything is urgent. So it is going to be first thing that pops in your head when you think about energy efficiency workforce. And I'll let whoever would like to go first go, and if it's too quiet, I will start to call on people.
So I'd reiterate quickly our three-prong approach. So if you had a pot, for us, it's been a focus on jobs recruiting, training, and diversity. And if you had to, you really are going to see the gap that Paul talked about in terms of skills. So what are the partnerships you can provide out there? To be honest, there's a lot of funding available for training that might allow you to leverage certain non-government organizations and take that. And so you can kind of see that as paid for to some degree. So many organizations that will do that work. So how can you contract with those companies that could help you to find the people that you need, and then getting some admin resources in place to help with some of the diversity components, because you do need to be able to, you can't manage what you don't measure. So I'd say you need resources to do that.
So that's a very tough, it's one of those questions you want to ask 5 more questions, but I'm going to give my best answer. I think that I would do an analysis, because what I've realized is that the money is there. It's not a limited amount of money, right? So that would be my first answer. I think there's a study from McKinsey. There's almost $2 billion just not used in workforce development. So I think the education around workforce development, the education around what Mary and her team is doing, and an analysis of, hey, if we do these 5 things, we now get access to these programs. Remember, states are running programs, utilities are running programs, nonprofits have programs, philanthropy groups have programs. Like, it's nonstop. So so I want to make sure maybe just thinking through, just learning more will be my recommendation, not so much going to target one specific strategy.
Excellent, thank you. Skip, and then Mary, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Sounds good. I think totally agree with everything everyone said. Something I would underline, and something that we hear a ton from contractors, is on-the-job training and the importance of on-the-job training. This training is, in a lot of cases, already being done on the ground, but it's being done out of the pockets of the small businesses who are employing energy efficiency and electrification contractors. And so, as I noted, they work with very small margins. So the possibility of, bringing folks in so they get that professional experience, they get that on-the-job experience out in the field, they're able to work towards a certification to make themselves personally more marketable in the industry, to grow professionally, is also really invaluable to getting to know the firm, and actually adding capacity to these jobs kind of as quickly as we can, given the extant demand that is out there, with rebates and currently tax credits, along with other state and utility programs. So I would underscore on-the-job training being a big priority, hopefully in state programs that we see.
Great, thank you. And Mary? Yeah.
Thanks for letting me build off of everyone else's great points. I would really focus on upskilling existing workers who maybe are in adjacent industries, but not already working on energy efficiency or electrification technologies, or maybe are starting to dabble in them, but are still not comfortable pitching them to customers. That could include electricians or plumbers, construction managers, folks who are already doing great work, but maybe are less familiar with heat pumps or heat pump water heaters, or specific energy upgrades that we're all working to deploy. And they could really hit the ground running in deploying the home energy rebate programs. And I think hopefully they could get to a point where they're comfortable telling customers about these exciting new technologies and bringing them into their homes. And from there, I hope they could also feel comfortable bringing other people into this workforce, to diversify the industry and bring in the next generation of energy efficiency workers.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for staying on for a few extra minutes and giving those answers. There are a ton of questions in the Q&A, but I'll just say that we will be sending out a recording and slides that has everyone's contact information. So please feel free to get in touch with myself or any of the panelists. And please join us next week for a discussion on how regulators can help in IRA implementation. And just one more huge thank you, Paul, Waltasia, Skip, and Mary, for a wonderful webinar about workforce.